I am going to start by introducing truly an amazing individual, a global leader, someone who I've gotten to recently know. And we are very fortunate in Los Angeles to have now, as Australia's Consul General here in Los Angeles, Ambassador Jane Duke, who has become an incredible partner to the community here in Los Angeles, to us in California, and to TreePeople in specific. Ambassador Duke is just considered truly one of the most effective consul generals. She has built a tremendous base of just collaboration that's going to really help not just Australia, but I think being here as Consul General of Los Angeles really be a true partner to us. And so it's really such an honor to have your presence with us, Ambassador Duke, have your support, and really see the leadership that you have provided to ensure the success of this Tree Talk. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for helping us put this together. And I'd love to be able to give you a few minutes to just to introduce the work that you're doing and the leadership that you in Australia have done around our topic today of just the impacts of devastating fires that we see more and more and what we can do. So welcome, Ambassador Duke. And again, thank you for honoring us with your presence.
Thank you so much, Cindy. It's an absolute delight to co-host this with you, with TreePeople and the Government of New South Wales. It's a very timely webinar on fire prevention, response and recovery, and it's with such a distinguished panel of experts. Australia and the United States have faced extreme fire seasons in recent years, devastating our communities, our wildlife and our forests. Many of us have had personal experience in being caught up in wildfires. And Western United States has faced another year of drought and is already experiencing heat waves and fires. The fire season here is beginning earlier and finishing later. New South Wales and California enjoy a sister state relationship, which has helped us support one another in times of crisis. Our experts have fought fires side by side for many years. They've worked together to share the latest know-how on fire mitigation and management to help our communities, wildlife and habitat recover. This shared and lived experience makes our special relationship even more impactful. We are honoured that the Lieutenant Governor of California will provide introductory remarks to today's panel. Ambassador Eleni Kounalakis was sworn in as the 50th Lieutenant Governor of California in 2019. She is the first woman elected as Lieutenant Governor of California, and Governor Newsom appointed her as his international representative. She's previously served as President Obama's ambassador to the Republic of Hungary and also led AKT Development, one of California's most respected housing development firms. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis, and over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Duke. It is a great pleasure to be with you today with your amazing partners at TreePeople and with our sister state friends from New South Wales. The topic to be discussed today, wildfire prevention, response, and recovery, could not be more timely or more important. It is clear that combating the impacts of a warming planet is critical for all of us, and perhaps nowhere are the impacts of climate change demonstrated more vividly than by the increased size and intensity of wildfires affecting our two states and indeed the world. The wildfires last year in California were devastating. In 2020, we fought over 8,600 fires that burned more than 4.1 million acres, 4% of California. 5 of the 6 largest fires in California history happened last year alone. In 2018, we lost 85 lives in a single fire which destroyed the town of Paradise. Some of these fires have been caused by extreme weather events like rare dry lightning strikes. Others have been started by utility lines. There is no question that the increase have weakened our forests. The effects of years of drought, combined with winds of increased intensity, not only in the south of our state, has been the case before, but all over our state, have turned what used to be routine fires into firestorms that move quickly and threaten entire communities. We have also seen our traditional fire season lengthened to the point where it seems we are fighting fires almost year-round. Our friends in New South Wales have faced similar challenges. Last year, more than 13 million acres burned, 2,500 homes were destroyed, and at least 25 people died. Fortunately, our experts are working closely together in an effort to prevent such fires, and when they inevitably break out, on how to manage the consequences and to protect our people and natural resources. And we are very grateful to our partners in Australia who have sent firefighters to help us in California during some of our most difficult moments. We have so much to learn from each other. By combining our experiences, our knowledge, and our spirits of innovation, we can continue to work to lead the global fight to protect our planet and our people from the natural disasters that, while always a reality, have now become more common, more widespread, and more devastating due to climate change. That is why today's Tree Talks panel discussion is so important. The experts who will be speaking today are recognized leaders in this field, and the wisdom and perspectives they can share will be invaluable to addressing this ongoing crisis. I'd like to thank TreePeople CEO Cindy Montañez for not only organizing and moderating today's webinar, but for the ongoing work you do to protect our planet and our communities. I want to thank our panel of experts and all of you who are watching for your interest and your activism. And finally, thanks again to Consul General Jane Duke, to your team at the Australian Consulate General in Los Angeles, and to all of our friends in New South Wales. And Cindy, back over to you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor and Ambassador Jane Duke, just for your local and global leadership. You do so much to improve the quality of life for millions of people. And you have set the context for what I believe is going to be one of the most important tree talks that we will have. We know, as you said, that there will be increased wildfire danger with these extended droughts, sometimes overdevelopment, climate change, and really a lack of sufficient investment in areas that are prone to be high fire risk. But today we're going to learn more about what we can do to protect human lives, property, and our precious ecosystem. But I just have to thank both of you again. As a woman, it's just wonderful to see the smart, intelligent, passionate women being national and international leaders. So thank you both. And again, welcome to everyone to Tree Talks, a public lecture series hosted by TreePeople and co-hosted today by Ambassador Jane Duke. Our whole series is about we're going to teach, root, engage, and entertain on the environment, exactly as the acronym suggests. Again, I'm Cindy Montañez. I am CEO of TreePeople, and I'm going to be moderating today's very frank conversation with top state and international leaders in the field of fire preparedness, response, and recovery. Our intent with Tree Talks is to address a variety of environmental issues that impact our communities. But we also want to not just talk about it, but we really want to advance discussions to make changes and find solutions at the local, state, federal, and at the global level, hence today's partnership. For those of you that may be new to TreePeople, you will love what we do. TreePeople has become one of the largest environmental movements here in Southern California. Our mission is simple. We're going to inspire, we're going to engage, we're going to support people like all of you here today to take action for our environment. And we're going to share this process as a model for the world, as we believe that we are all tree people. We are fueled by over 10,000 volunteers year after year, hundreds of community partners, brilliant researchers from top universities, very forward-thinking business partners, and our incredibly passionate board and donors, several of you who are with us today. So to begin this conversation, we're going to start off with a land acknowledgement. We at TreePeople acknowledge that over 3,000 acres of precious lands that we own or we manage or we conserve are on the ancestral lands of the Tongva, the Chumash, and the Fernandeño-Tatavian people, the original stewards of this land. So we honor our Indigenous elders, both past and present, for their continued connection and protection of one of the most beautiful and ecologically diverse landscapes in the world here in the Santa Monica Mountains. So to go to our tree talk today on fire. We know that California and Australia, especially New South Wales, has lived through record-setting fires in 2019, in 2020, and we're now preparing for 2021. With a lot of the stark images that you've seen, we kick off this tree talk. Here in California, wildfires have burned, as we heard from our Lieutenant Governor, 5 times more land this time than last year at exactly this time. The drought state of emergency declared by Governor Newsom expanded to 41 of our 58 counties just since early May. And last week here in Los Angeles, we had flex alerts across the county. New South Wales, Australia encountered more than 13 million acres burned and nearly 2,500 homes destroyed, as we just heard. So merging our forces and collaborating with resources and expertise as we have between California and Australia, with our firefighters, trained volunteers, prepared community members, we've been able to do we've made progress in preventing, I think, even greater devastation, but clearly we have a lot more to learn from each other and ways to collaborate. So as we face this overwhelming possibility of even more damaging fires this season, we talk about the learnings from the past season and how we can advance in preparing and responding to these alarming realities we are faced with. So we are all here because we all want to establish a healthy, viable environment. And our guests today have literally been on the front lines of some of the most devastating fires. So we are honored to have each one of you. So let's welcome our Tree Talk experts, Bob Baird, who is Director of Fire and Aviation for the Pacific Southwest region of the U.S. Forest Service, Commissioner Shane Fitzsimmons, who is a true national hero and a Commissioner of Resilience in New South Wales, Australia, Dr. Kellie Leigh, who is Executive Director and CEO of Science for Wildlife, a conservation biologist with the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, and Chief Kim Zagaris, who is Wildlife Policy and Technology Advisor for the Western Fire Chiefs Association. Thank you all for participating in this very important conversation. So let's start this discussion, and let's start with Shane. Commissioner Fitzsimmons, you are absolutely considered a national hero in Australia, and also someone that we look to in California for all you have done to prepare communities, work with governments, with public agencies to face this tremendous challenge of wildfires. So help us set the stage. Tell us about most recently the 2020 fire season in New South Wales and some of the greatest challenges that you faced.
Yes, good morning, Cindy, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to join. Firstly, can I too acknowledge the lands across Australia of our First Nations people and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and of course to all our traditional owners right across the globe. Thank you for the flattering introduction, Cindy. But the reality is, I was part of simply part of a remarkable team that sought to save and protect as many people in New South Wales through what turned out to be an unprecedented fire season and a widely damaging and destructive season. As you've indicated in some of the summary figures, it was unprecedented in so many ways, not just because of the vast area that was burnt out by fires. 5.5 million hectares, as you say, 13.5 million acres, just under 2,500 homes destroyed, lots of community infrastructure, communities, environment, key infrastructure, bridges, towns, villages, businesses, primary industries, farmers, lots of livelihoods damaged and or destroyed. And of course, an extraordinary toll to our environment, burning across extraordinary tracts of land that are our national parks and some of our iconic ecosystems and environmental areas that the nation has to offer. But when you look at the broad impact in terms of the unprecedented nature, you won't find me using the common phrase black summer bushfires, because I think it does a gross disservice to all those that were being so heavily impacted and affected by fires well and truly before we came into summer. And what I mean by that, in New South Wales, we were averaging more than 1,000 fires a month during winter. Our winter period, June, July, August, averaging more than 1,000 fires a month. And then it simply intensified in the number of new fires as we went into spring and we went into summer. Yes, the toll was extraordinary, but so too was the protracted nature of the season. Invariably, if you look back through our history in New South Wales and Australia, you'll find that most of our deadliest, most damaging and destructive bushfires typically lasted for a matter of days or a matter of weeks. But what we saw during the 1920 fire season, on the back of one of the worst droughts we've seen in centuries that built up over many years, we saw a moisture deficit in the landscape such that the fires were starting extremely easy. They were spreading very quickly, and they were burning into areas that would traditionally be recognised as fairly high moisture laden areas like rainforests and other ecosystems. But unfortunately, the lack of moisture meant that these fires were burning through even in those areas. And we also saw, unfortunately, the worst forest fire danger indices since records began. It was the hottest, driest year on record for Australia, for New South Wales, and extended right through post-Christmas into February. So we effectively had 5 to 6 months of continuous, sustained, high-intensity fire activity, and some of the most aggressive fire behaviour, some of the most rapid spreads of fire were occurring at 2, 3 and 4 a.m., not at 2, 3 and 4 p.m., which is the traditional convention where you've got the elements of the heat of the day, the dryness and the winds that pick up. Normally conditions moderate overnight, but the lack of moisture really drove extraordinary behaviour and then also loss. 26 lives were lost in New South Wales, 33 lives were lost nationally, and of the 26 lives lost in New South Wales, 7 of them were firefighters, 4 of our volunteers and 3 of our aircrew. And we know the tally would have been considerably higher, and I mean no disrespect or insensitivity to those that lost loved ones and to our fallen colleagues. But if we hadn't invested in prevention and mitigation activities, if we haven't invested in the largest collaborated workforce and firefighting arsenal, but most importantly, if we hadn't learned the lessons and invested enormously into public information and warnings, providing timely, accurate, up-to-date information to allow people to make informed decisions in a timely way, we know the death toll, we know the broader toll would have been considerably higher, and some of the objective analysis signaled that we should have been counting deaths in the hundreds based on some of the historical parallels that could be drawn in relation to the intensity and concentration of damage that was occasioned during that season. So you're talking about a very broad spectrum, everything from mitigation and prevention activities, awareness and and engagement campaigns, right through to firefighting techniques, public information and warnings, and of course the new role that I'm a part of now in unprecedented damage and destruction and fires. You've also got unprecedented recovery, and recovery is about rebuilding. It's about repair. It's about renewal and reconstruction. But it's also, most importantly, about the healing, the societal healing, and the broader environmental and community healing that's got to take place as a result of those fires.
Thank you, Commissioner, for setting the context and taking us to a place where we could just visualize and imagine what's going on in New South Wales and other parts of Australia. And it connected me to a lot of moments here in California, in the neighborhood that I live in, which is a very high fire risk zone. Those scary moments when you begin to face evacuation notices. So I'd like to know, Bob, and why don't you talk to us about California, right? Because what Commissioner Fitzsimmons was just talking about, it made it seem as he was talking about what's going on in California. Talk to us about the situation in California and what do we have to expect this coming year?
Thanks, Cindy. And hearing Shane talk, it's like the same thing in the other hemisphere, right? So we're experiencing almost the exact same situation where I got into this job in 2017. I previously had been on the central coast of California, right? A normally moderate area. And we had large fires that went months. The Sobranes went 84 days. So these fires are not only getting bigger, they're going longer. The costs and the destruction is more significant. And so it's really a similar tale of fire behavior. There's tree mortality occurring in California, especially in the Sierras, due to drought-stressed trees. The beetles are attacking the trees there. And so working in the U.S. Forest Service, it's not just about suppressing the fire, which we've been able to do for, successfully for a long period of time. That creates other problems, right? Where it's a fire-prone landscape that hasn't allowed the fire to go through and clear and create a healthy ecosystem, right? A sustainable, resilient ecosystem, which is really what's going to get us back. There is actually good fire. Unfortunately, we've excluded fire differently than maybe the indigenous people who lived here before, where they allowed fire to go. We've suppressed fire, and understandably, right? We're talking about lives. You talked about, Paradise, 86 lives, right? Tremendous loss of life. We're seeing fires that are running tremendous distances at odd times, where similar to Australia, overnight in where we would normally have a break, there is no break. The season is going longer. We're having fires like the Thomas Fire in Ventura. I was there for Christmas, right? We had Santa in fire camp because we were there on the fire through Christmas. So they're getting longer, they're getting bigger. The fuel is just as built up. Now we have dead and dying forests through drought-stressed trees. And so it's a similar tale. We have a tremendous set of resources in California where we share interagency resources across the state. And we, as the federal government, brings them in from the Western United States. But for more than 100 days last year, we had every firefighting resource in. And that's where, our partnership with Australia, I think they sent Australian and Kiwi firefighters to us in 2018. We then sent our people to them in 2019 and 20. And so I see that as being the future. We've got to cooperate and collaborate because there's not enough to deal with the present situation. And I'm glad to be here to talk to you all and these people that really care about solving the problem. And it's going to take a grassroots effort, government effort, private effort, utilities, scientists. It's going to take a collaborative effort. So I look forward to the discussion, Cindy, but same situation we're facing in California is almost exactly what the commissioner said.
Thank you for that, Bob. Chief Zagaris, let's go to you. So we've heard from Commissioner Fitzsimmons and Bob. Essentially, we're expecting wildfires throughout the year. 1,000 fires in December just in New South Wales. That is mind blowing. And to hear Bob say, basically, the fire season, is there such thing as a fire season anymore, right? It seems like fires could exist at any time with extreme heat and droughts, et cetera, not taking care of our forests. So Chief Zagaris, talk to us about this coordination, right? The ability to coordinate resources, not just now with your sister city. We're talking about now coordination at an international level. And your role as chief and working with chiefs of fire departments across the state. Talk to us about the coordination, the importance of coordination at the government level and also at the local community level. And what can we as community members be doing to support those efforts that are happening with government coordination at local, state, county, and international levels?
Thank you. I would tell you that all of us that work in this arena would really tell you that it starts very early on. The cooperation, the support from one another, and within at least the United States, and you look at California, we've got local, state, federal, and tribal responsibilities. And to be real honest, we've got some of the largest departments in the country here in California. One of the largest state forestry, CAL FIRE is the largest state forestry in the country. And the U.S. Forest Service has more resources here in California than they do anywhere else in the whole rest of the country. This tells you the magnitude of our problem. And what we've come to learn, and we've learned this the hard way, is that no one stands alone. We have to work together from initial attack to the ability to surge our resources. And that takes a lot of cooperation and coordination at those levels of government each and every day. And it's really about, the taxpayer pays their local, state, federal taxes, and they expect when they call 911 to get the same service. And we try to provide them that. Again, it's not easy. We deal with our own bureaucracies, we deal with our own systems, but I think California does a very good job of coming together each and every day. And as good as we are, we know, and we've learned a long time, that in a lot of cases, we rely upon our partners in other states at the local level to assist us. California has interstate compacts with surrounding states. We are part of the 50 States Emergency Managers Assistance Compact. It's not unusual to have people from Florida or New York or Maine all the way into California. In fact, last year, the state flew in resources from New Jersey by aircraft to put them on the ground. And that happens pretty regularly. Just as important is, and I think our state forestries work very well in the different states, moving resources back and forth. The U.S. Forest Service and the Department of the Interior agencies, the coordination that takes place at the National Interagency Fire Center is really just outstanding. They move resources on a regular basis. But again, what's really important is that no one is big enough to do it on their own. We do it very well together. We do it very closely together. And during these times of these sieges, and we were talking before we started this discussion and opened it up, there are 5 levels of preparedness that we use for wildland within the United States. One being nothing's really going on, your everyday situation, and we bump it up, 5 being the very worst. Well, nationally, we're actually at a preparedness level 4 right now, which is a little soon than we would like to have it, but just as an example. That means resources and personnel are getting tight. We're having to move and do some things. So it takes even more coordination to bring everything together, and that's being done. More importantly, we in the fire service do our best each and every day, but really the most success that we can have is with our citizens. And our citizens, one, being prepared to know what they need to do to evacuate. One of the things that came out of the California watched really out of the 2008 fire season in Australia was stay and defend or evacuate. And out of that came a program called Ready, Set, Go. And I can tell you, there was a hard-fought conversation in California with all of our partners onto that level. But that program was developed by Orange County, LA County, Ventura County, became a statewide program and went on to become a national program. It's being used each and every day. Ready means you get your home ready in case of fire, do your clearances, harden your home. Set means you've got your important items that you need to evacuate with, and you're prepared to go when the authorities tell you to evacuate. And the last one is go. And we really find it very best that when we ask people to evacuate, they do. Unfortunately, some don't. Puts themselves in harm's way. Sometimes it puts our firefighters in harm's way, having to protect them. In fact, I could surely tell you that 2017, 2018, even in 2019 and 2020, we're spending more time with our firefighters helping with the evacuations and are able to fight fire, which is something that we haven't really trained them to do in years past, but we're having to do it today. So our citizens can do the best in preparing themselves, but not only the folks that are living in and around the wildland, but those who come to visit, to get out of the inner cities, who come to visit. The more precautions they take, the more safety they provide, and being careful, the better off we can do. I think early on, we were talking about the power grid. Unfortunately, that's become even a big issue within California. With all of our utilities, they've become a main source of some of our ignitions. We're working very well with them to try to correct some of that, more clearance. And again, it takes a whole community to work very closely together each and every day, from our citizens to our government agencies, to our utilities, to our citizens. It really is a team effort. And it's what prepares us for wildland season, prepares us for all weather events, prepares us for when the ground shakes. Whatever the event may be, it's about being prepared each and every day.
Thank you, Chief. And truly, our hearts of gratitude go out to you and to all of our frontline firefighters that are out there fighting these devastating fires. And as we've heard from the three of you already, a lot of times highly unpredictable, and you're putting your lives on the line. And I think that the more that we, obviously, as residents, as homeowners that live in these areas or anywhere, the more that we can be prepared and ready, I think the more it's going to allow everybody to get through these safely. And, I'd like to now go to Dr. Leigh. We have heard, right, that now there's a lot of massive, unprecedented scale of fires. And we are talking about protecting human life, protecting property, but there's also the wildlife, critical habitat that lives in our communities. I could say that in the Santa Monica Mountains, where TreePeople is located, in Topanga, where I have my residence, there's protected mountain lions and bobcats and other precious species that sometimes we don't spend as much time thinking about, but you do, Dr. Leigh, and you have had incredible success in looking at the entire ecosystem and protection of habitat. So I'd like to talk. I would like for you to talk to us about the needs to change possibly how we're managing wildlife during not just the fire, but as we prepare for the increasing danger of wildfires. What more can we do or should we be doing to protect critical habitat and important wildlife that either is in the natural open spaces, or sometimes it's our pets, right? Our horses, our animals that live with us, and also part of our family. What more should we be doing?
Hello, Cindy, and thank you very much. I'd first like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land I live and work on, which is the Gundungurra and Darug people, and to the elders past, present and emerging. As Shane touched on the response here in the 2019-20 fires was amazing. Like, you know, the resources that were thrown out there in dealing with such catastrophic fires was incredible, and the loss of human life was minimal, as Shane has mentioned, compared to what it could have been. Unfortunately, we didn't do so well on the wildlife front. So the estimates for wildlife lost is about 3 billion animals. And we saw something new in terms of scale and intensity that we'd never seen before, which is having an ongoing impact on our ecosystems. So I'm based up in the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area, which was hit about 70 to 80% by fire. Particularly working with koalas in partnership with San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, and also with support under the New South Wales Koala Strategy. And we'd been looking at modelling climate refugia and uncovering all these new populations of koalas with high genetic diversity. When the fires came, they hit 4 out of 5 of our populations of koalas that we'd found. And what we found, and this was shared across the fire grounds, I think, you know, because there was so many fires, all of the resources had to go to protecting human life and property. So what we saw was fires that started inside protected area systems in remote areas. They had to be left, and they then grew and joined up and became these mega fires. Like we had the largest single ignition fire in history in the Gospers Mountain fire up here in the northern section of the Blue Mountains. And then we had a massive fire to the south, the Green Wattle fire. So it was impacting so many areas, and there was just nothing for wildlife essentially. So that pushed some pretty extreme measures. So we actually approached national parks and said, look, you know, we found this really important koala population. Can we go in and pull some out in front of the approaching fire? And there was no precedent and no protocol to follow for that, but we did get support. So we managed to get in and get some koalas out. We then launched into about 3 months of constant emergency response for wildlife. So food and water stations, getting out to where we could. And we faced the same challenges then. So after the fires, there was, you know, it wasn't safe to access. When the fires get really big, you get what's called a Section 44 fire here. So state of emergency, and it falls under Rural Fire Service. And so again, that's about people and property, as it should be, but again, nothing for wildlife. So no access into critical areas to help wildlife, no policies and procedures in place as well. So we all learned, you know, thousands of lessons out of that in how unprepared we were for something of that scale and extent. And in terms of how we manage fires, you know, there's been a lot of inquiries and hearings. There's a lot of new recommendations coming out as well. And a lot of these issues are being addressed in terms of new protocols and procedures and how we can manage fire. But it was a complete game changer, particularly in terms of ecology. Like, we're used to fire here in Australia, and we're used to seeing big fires. And across the World Heritage Area system, you know, we'd often see maybe 1 or 2 national parks go up at once in our fires. This area is made up of, it's 1 million hectares, and it's 8 protected areas, so national parks and a caves reserve, and all 8 of them went up at once. And when that happens, when you're looking at extent of, you know, that massive proportion, basically you get concerned about refuge areas. So normally if you have a smaller fire, you've got edges and unburnt patches. And those areas are where the animals can come back from to recolonize the burnt patches. So when you have a massive fire extent, the key concern is, well, do we have any refuge left? You know, you've got temporary refuges in terms of areas that are unburnt, but also over the long term, normally we've got rainforests, cool gullies, all sorts of different patches where the fire wouldn't burn so intensely. And in a lot of cases, they burnt. We'd had such heat stress in the vegetation, and it was so dry. You know, normally to do hazard reduction burns, they'll burn towards a creek line or something, and then the fire will stop. It didn't stop. It burnt Gondwana rainforest fragments and places that just normally wouldn't burn. So we are definitely having to look at how we manage fire in a completely different way. So, and I think there's 2 key elements. The first one is in prescribed burning, and looking at ecological burns, cultural burns, and hazard reduction burns, and having a conversation where everybody's coming from the same angle on those. In terms of vegetation, how that's impacted, you know, you've got fire frequency and severity that can change the vegetation and actually make it more flammable. And then at the other extent, at the other scale, you've got what we saw, which was weather-driven fires. So, and we know that areas that had prescribed burns 3 months before went up again under these fires. And so now we're looking at pictures of, well, okay, inside protected area systems for wildlife, maybe we have to actively manage natural assets as asset protection zones and actively manage to conserve those refugia so that animals can come back if fires of this intensity and scale continue, which, you know, under climate change, it's highly likely they will. So it's been a real game changer, and it's certainly a concern. In terms of recovery, it's a very long road. I mean, we are seeing some epicormic growth, you know, little shoots on the trees coming out, and signs of recovery in the bush. But in terms of ecosystem function and structure, you know, it can be 10 years or more before the understory comes back and, you know, the plants that provide nectar for various animals are there. So it was absolutely devastating impact. I mean, the good thing that we saw on the other side of it was the community willingness was incredible, you know, particularly people that live in and around these national park systems. Everybody wanted to help. And I know National Parks was absolutely overwhelmed with thousands of phone calls of people trying to get in to help wildlife. So it was everything from individuals to organizations, animal welfare organizations, researchers, zoos, just community members getting out there or trying to get out there to help wildlife. So there is this massive resource. And I think in terms of wildlife, we rely on everybody being involved, you know, because resources are quite limited in comparison. And so it's a matter of sharing information and giving out good information. We did see problems where people wanted to help and ended up putting out the wrong food or water for wildlife and actually harming wildlife because there was a lot of misinformation going around on social media. So getting that evidence-based information out there to people, and also coordinating and giving them opportunities to help in a safe way is really important as well.
Thank you, Dr. Leigh. I want to go back to a few of the points that you made, and let's start with managing, right? Properly managing our forest and other areas. So this is one, I think, where Commissioner Fitzsimmons or Bob, Chief Zagaris, I think the three of you could probably answer this, right? So there's questions in the chat about controlled burns or prescribed burns. So maybe we could explain what is it? Is it a prescribed burn? Is it a controlled burn? Bob, I think you would be perfect to answer that. Chief Zagaris, you talked a little bit about you know, work with Indigenous communities, and so there's questions about collaborative measures that are being taken with Indigenous communities or traditional practices that incorporate cultural burning as a preventative measure, right? As part of, again, these prescribed burnings. So Bob, why don't we start with you, and then Chief, you could maybe answer the question about working with Indigenous communities. And then Commissioner Fitzsimmons, maybe talk to us a little bit about those types of more forward-thinking measures that need to take place that we may be a little bit surprised by. Some of us as environmental tree people, you know, do we want to burn trees, but do we have to? I don't know. Talk to us, Bob. What should we be doing?
Yeah, Cindy, that's a great question. So, prescribed burning, often referred to by Indigenous people as they would burn part of the natural cycle, right? Many of these ecosystems were meant to burn. In fact, the giant sequoias and other trees, when you are in awe of the gigantic trees in California, they were allowed to grow that big because of a frequent fire return interval, meaning low intensity fires were actually allowed to move through, and they were allowed these large, then that cleared the forest floor and allowed large trees to grow larger. We no longer have that because we've moved communities in, right? And so those communities and publics and all kinds of things, we move infrastructure, utilities across forests. And so part of our mission and our challenge as an agency is managing for current and future generations, right? Because we in California manage around 20 million acres, right? So that's a large expanse of landscape. And if the landscape is managed with a prescribed burn, literally like the doctor, but it's a prescription, meaning the burn is put on the ground by prescribed burn bosses, burn technicians. They'll go in and measure the temperature, the humidity, the fuel, the vegetation. Is the fire going to burn in a productive way, not destructive? And if you've seen on videos, destructive fire looks like crown fires, where it ladders up the tree and moves across at high speeds, or where we see these ember-driven, high wind-driven fires across the floor. So we're trying to burn more safely in better places, and that's what's going to remove the fuel. We've seen, we can see it up looking at it, and we can see it through satellite research and the satellite detections we have, that a fire moving rapidly will literally go down in a prescribed area where the fuel's been removed. As the doctor said, sometimes the humidity will reduce so much that even the healthy wood that's left will become fuel. And we often refer to vegetation as fuel, which is probably not fair, but it literally becomes part of the fire ecosystem. As it's got its oxygen, it's got its heat, all it's looking for is something to go up. So we're trying to look for opportunities to do prescribed burning across the state or wherever we need to. And that's one of the challenges I think we face in the future, is how do we get the public to understand the difference between good fire and bad fire? And there are differences, and the fire was meant to be in the ecosystem. It was meant to be there. In fact, many species require fire to actually propagate, to allow their cones to open up. So it's a natural thing.
Either Chief, do you want to add to that, or Commissioner Fitzsimmons?
I'm more than happy to add to that, Cindy. And by way of context, where I'd be coming from is the Rural Fire Service in New South Wales is the lead organisation that has the statutory responsibilities for coordinating fire management across all agencies and layers of government. So it is about the applied use of fire, the deliberate use of fire for mitigation and prevention, but also for the coordination of fire response and fire suppression. And I think you're tapping into what is the most complex social debate, and a debate that we need to have very sensibly, because you've got to partner that up with community awareness, community expectation, and what we find over and over again is even those people that live in the highest risk areas, our survey results after being impacted by fire show that people invariably acknowledge and knew that they lived in high fire prone areas, yet invariably they will use narrative like they were surprised how quickly the fire came, they were caught off guard, and one of the most concerning bits of narrative is we've heard the advice, we've listened to the advice around preparation and readiness, preparing your property, your home, your business well ahead of fire, but also in the event of fire, what will you do, what's at the ready, and what are those important decisions around leaving early, relocation, those sorts of things, evacuation. And most people acknowledge that they knew they should have and could have done more. The research over and over again shows that the vast majority of homes, 80 to 90%, don't catch fire through the flame front. They actually catch fire through the ember attacks. So the more we can do to prepare our properties, to prepare our infrastructure against the onset of ember attack, the increased survivability of property infrastructure goes through the roof. So getting back to the applied fire discussion, I think we've also got to be very cautious and not get caught up in what runs the risk of the new woke narrative about cultural and Indigenous burning. And what I mean by that is, in the decades that I've been involved as a practitioner on the ground, and more recently as the head of the organisation, Indigenous cultural burning attributes, cool burning, prescribed burning, understanding what is most important for different geographic areas, different ecosystems. We designate our jurisdiction across New South Wales into focus areas for fire management. We've got what we call the asset protection zones, where we concentrate on fuel reduction as the primary measure to provide the defendable space between the bushland area and the properties at risk. We've then got what we call the strategic fire advantage zones, where we seek to maintain seek to maintain fuel levels to a considered level, depending on the local area, and the pragmatism of being able to apply techniques to that, depending on the topography, the river systems, and all those other ecological factors that come into bear. And then the third area, more broadly, is what we designate as land management zones, where the dominance of interest and focus is around biodiversity and the vitality of the natural environment. And the more we understand and research and develop around what is the desirable fire frequency threshold, for example, for that particular ecosystem or series of ecosystems in different areas, I can confidently say over the decades we've seen a significant increase in tools and technology to map and understand those zones and those interplays between different priorities better. We're also using newer technologies that allow us to better control fire intensity when it comes to prescribed burning. And what I mean by that is things like ignition patterns and ignition techniques, the use of aerial incingerants, so dropping out ignition pills from helicopters, and more recently increasing use of drone technology to be able to grid that up on a smaller scale, so you can better manage the footprint of burning. You can manage the ignition sources adjacent to estuaries and river creek areas. But the other thing, of course, is that when we come into cultural and traditional burning aspects, picking up on what Bob said, a lot of the traditional burning techniques, certainly prior to European settlement here in Australia, our Indigenous populations were a lot more nomadic than we are. They use fire in the landscape to provide passage, to provide food source and hunting and gathering and all those sorts of things. The reality is now we set fire to the landscape deliberately for controlled burning and prescription burning techniques to manage fuel loads, to manage biodiversity. It doesn't take very long before that fire impacts on someone or something. And I would go as far as to say we are increasingly being challenged in New South Wales and Australia, where our use of prescribed burning to lower risk and to manage fuel levels is being seen adversely by many areas of the community because it brings smoke. And until someone tells me how we can do it, unfortunately, smoke is a natural byproduct of combustion, and smoke comes out of the prescribed burning. And don't get me wrong, there is a legitimate argument that heavily polluted atmospheres, airs around particularly basin communities. A lot of our cities and population areas are in natural basins, so you get these weather inversion layers that trap the smoke down, and it does lead to premature deaths. It exacerbates underlying respiratory and other conditions that people might have. So we're balancing up this real social argument all the time, and every time we're trying to do burning, you've got this extraordinary element of the community that are anti the burning regime because they don't want to see it. Yet the minute we get fires and we see loss and damage, the first default from most of the community is, why aren't you doing more burning? So we've got this real challenge around what do we do and where do we do it, and you know, this fanciful argument or this foolish argument of just doing areas of landmass to burn to deal with fire risk is folly. And the reality is we could go out and burn many hundreds of thousands of hectares of land, but it could be out in the middle of nowhere and not have any real effect on increasing the protection or the betterment of vulnerable communities. So it's about how do you concentrate and target on a risk process the best effects between mechanical burning and other treatments to increase that fuel management regime, but targeting the protection of others. And without labouring the point and occupying too much time, there is no one solution to fire management and living with fire in fire-prone landscapes. Community engagement, community education, personalising risk, owning the risk and doing something about it is really important. Managing fuel levels for biodiversity and fuel load concentrations for community protection, but also the way we design our landscapes, the way we open up new land for new release and development, the way we design and build communities, and the construction standards and the messaging around different fire dangers and what that means for different actions and different behaviours under different circumstances. So there's a very broad spectrum of debate and narrative that needs to be had, and it's complex. If it was easy, it would have been solved decades ago, obviously.
Thank you for being so frank and honest and direct, and really helping us like just get to, you know, some of these questions that are still debatable or being debated, but really as practitioners, you're seeing like what we need to do. So there's a lot of questions right now in the chat where people are saying, okay, money's going into wildfire recovery or wildfire preparedness. So questions about what can we do in our homes, right? We know that when fires happen, our firefighters may never get to our home. So what should we be doing in our homes? Some of the, or where can we look? Because we only have, 3 minutes left. Where can you refer our, our over 200 people that have been participating in today's Tree Talk? Where should they look to get real information and tips of how they could harden their homes and be ready, right? Before the fire even comes, we need to start focusing on being ready so that we save lives, we don't have as much property damage, and we also protect as much wildlife and habitat as possible. So any suggestions of where we should be looking? And then also in that, if you could all give some closing comments. I want to continue this conversation because I think you are all so knowledgeable and you're giving us real information, but we are approaching the hour. So where should we look? And then also closing thoughts for our listeners today. And maybe we start, we could go in the order of the Chief, Bob, Commissioner Fitzsimmons, and then Dr. Leigh.
Okay, real quickly, I would tell you, if you're in California, you could go to www.fire.ca.gov, which will take you to CAL FIRE's website. You'll find just about everything you need there. You can also go to NFPA, National Fire Protection Association's Wildfire site, as well as the International Fire Chiefs Association. There's a lot of information there to find what you need. I would share that our colleague Shane and I've had an opportunity to be in Australia a couple times, but you could transplant pretty much what we do on either of our continents and have almost similarities between our wildfires, our issues protecting structures, educating our citizens, to the floods and the destruction and rebuilding that comes afterwards, almost to the T. We're both in the process of trying to find technology to do a better way of not only mobilizing, but forecasting where we're going with fires, to do a better job of detecting the ignition and all the situational awareness tools we have. We work very closely together. We share a lot of information, and it's very unique that our summers are winter, our winters are summer, and our fire seasons continue to grow longer and longer, and we don't get much break. So a lot of similarities. It is a pleasure to work with my colleagues here that are on the panel, and a big thanks to the 200 plus people that have joined us today.
Thanks, Chief Zagaris. So Cindy, I'll put in the chat. I think the best thing that communities can do is get organized at the community level. There are programs out there that we have here that allow people to create community wildfire protection plans. So that community wildfire protection plan is your community speaking to county, state, and federal. There are federal grants available that allow them to do clearance, that allow them to get monies. But what often can be the case is if you build a community protection barrier and 1 or 2 homeowners decide not to participate, the whole thing can be flawed, because a fire front moving through any kind of defensible space, if it has area to move through, it can still move through. So a real good grassroots community effort on what do we want to see in our community, raising awareness, making sure that they can evacuate. We used to talk about ready, set, go in California. We just say go. because we have seen if evacuation areas can be clogged and people will lose their lives evacuating, being overtaken by the fire. And so that can also impede us as we're trying to respond. I think using technology, we have entered into, I would say, a golden era where we're satellite technology, unmanned systems, drones, as Shane had talked about, and aircraft. We can see a lot of tremendous fire behavior, but when the spark happens, it's almost like it's too late. I really like where people are going about prevention, home hardening, and promoting the use of prescribed burning in the right places for the right reason. But it starts with a community wildfire protection plan where they say, look, we're going to work to protect ourselves as a community, and we're going to take ownership over our protection, kind of like the early West, where they would try and make sure they protected and supported each other. So that's all I have. I really do also appreciate people's interest and community around this, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, colleagues. And look, I would just reiterate much as what's been said. This is a very complex area. Even with the new statutory authorities and controls that we've had in place in New South Wales and more recently right across Australia, where there is an authoritative capacity to provide for the conduct of mitigation and hazard reduction works across communities, no matter who owns the land, private or public landholders will be served notice if they don't comply with reasonable requests to manage fuel and hazards on their property. Similarly, with building design and construction standards, whilst that's been in place now in New South Wales for over 15 years, we're coming up to 20 years now in 2023. There's still a lot of legacy development with European development. So how do we ensure we get to those that aren't the subject of the new regime of standards and construction codes? And I think ultimately we've got to keep in mind that we're talking about fire management. We are talking about living, working, holidaying in fire-prone landscapes. So it's not just about being aware and understanding your personal risk where you live or where you work, but it's also about where you travel and where you holiday. And we just got to be really careful too, I think, in understanding the public debate, that what we're talking about with all these mitigants, with all these prevention activities, with all these plans and strategies and use of technologies and exchanges of information, you won't find that we're using the word elimination. We're not eliminating the risk. We're not eliminating vulnerability. We're not eliminating susceptibility. We're seeking to understand how do we ameliorate or lessen or seek to manage and limit the likelihood and the consequence of adverse fire outcomes in landscapes and communities where we live, work, and enjoy the beautiful serenity that nature provides. But from time to time, it is prone. It is prone to fire and the rapid spread of fire. And as has been talked about already, with seasons getting longer and overlapping between the northern and southern hemispheres, our ability to rely on the exchange is changing. Our need to invest in different strategies, different techniques is paramount. And the more we can share and grow that relationship and partnership into the future, the better we will be. The focus of priority in our legislation is first and foremost people. It is then property, and it is then environment. In all fire management, fire response, fire operations, we have the full spectrum of interest and focus on trying to save and protect as many and as much as we possibly can. And that's a spectrum of fire management, not just the response effort. And it translates between people, our built environment, and of course, our natural environment and ecosystems.
Thanks, Shane. And I think the other panelists have covered that question really well. I guess I wanted to touch on prevention for wildlife in closing comments. I just want to note also that we need to be careful about talking about cultural burning method as a prescribed burn method. You know, it's done for different purpose as a cultural burn. I think there's a lot we can learn from it. There's certainly a renewed interest there and a lot of conversations happening around that. In terms of prevention for wildlife, I mean, I think a lot of the concern is we need to get into a position where obviously the priorities are human life, property, then wildlife. At the moment, we're from a resource point of view, we're facing a choice often between wildlife and people. And if we see fires like this going through our national park system, like we do on a regular basis, we actually stand to potentially lose the biodiversity that those national parks are set aside for. So as Bob touched on, those plants and animals are adapted to fire to some extent, and they expect it, but they're adapted over a certain frequency and severity of fire, not under climate change. So it's really important to come up with these new management systems. And we don't actually know what that looks like yet. Like, we don't know what a fire refugiate should look like under climate change or how to manage it. And so that's some of the research we're doing at the moment. We're using remote sensing, looking at vegetation recovery rates, the drivers of presence in a landscape where koalas and other species have survived. But, you know, ecosystems are really complex things. You need different fire for different places. So there's a huge amount of knowledge we still need to have to be able to manage fire under climate change in an effective way, to conserve biodiversity and the ecosystem processes that we depend on as a species as well. You know, I think we really need to get in a position where resources are allocated, that it's not a choice between people and wildlife, because we need ecosystems, you know, to survive on. And it is a really complex conversation to have, and there's a lot more knowledge that we need to gain to do that effectively. I'd just like to say thank you very much. It's been a really interesting discussion, and thanks to everyone for attending as well.
Yeah, thank you to each one of you and Ambassador Jane Duke for helping us put together. You are all truly some of the most brilliant minds that I have listened to, and we are so proud to have you as our partners at TreePeople. This conversation was recorded. We're going to share it out through a link. Watch it again, because every single one of our speakers said a lot of very meaningful, gave us a lot of very meaningful information and a lot of tips of what we can do and real information. So I appreciate the straight talk, the honesty, the direct, the frankness that you had with us. It's such a serious issue of how we can be more ready for the wildfires that will continue to hit our communities. We as TreePeople also lots of questions of what people can do in their communities. Reach out to us. Yes, we have infrastructure, we have resources. We want to do tree planting, tree care, restoration work. As Bob was talking about, things we could do to better manage our forests. We're working in the U.S. on U.S. Forest Service lands in partnership with the U.S. Forest. We are doing work in the Santa Monica Mountains. We're doing work in urban communities. Reach out to us. We absolutely want to work with anybody that wants to work with us in communities all over. And please stay involved. Stay involved with us at TreePeople. Stay involved with other organizations. Look at fire safe councils. Look at things that we can do to build those community plans that Bob was talking about. Many ideas from Commissioner Fitzsimmons and Chief and Dr. Leigh. So we're grateful to everybody's participation. Turn on your video if you can right now so we could all see each other. There was consistently, I mean, about 200 people that participated. There's everyone. Hello. It's great to see people's faces. Wonderful. I see lots of familiar faces and lots of people we don't know. So thank you all. We hope you found it to be as insightful as we did. Join us for like our next tree talk. We will be having it in September, and stay updated through treepeople.org. And thank you. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being interested. This is a global issue, and we have friends all over the world. And what better friendship than Californians and Australians coming together? So thank you, everyone. You know, many, many blessings to everyone. Please be safe and reach out to us. And again, a special thank you and acknowledgement to Ambassador Jane Duke for being the amazing global leader that you are, truly a partner to the world. And we deeply appreciate you, and we love you, and we are here to continue to partner together. So good seeing everybody. Goodbye, take care, and good morning and good night to